Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about the strength deficit or the concept of a strength deficit, okay? So, first off, what is that? So, a strength deficit, as you can see that I've got on the whiteboard, is going to be the difference between your absolute strength and then your maximal strength, okay? Now, obviously, this doesn't mean a lot if you don't know what these two terms mean, okay? So, what your absolute strength is it's a measurement of how hard your muscles can contract kind of under involuntary force, okay? So the way you're going to measure that is either through, in a lab, you're going to research that through outside electrical muscle stimulation. So you're going to hook up your muscles to an e-stim machine, and then you can basically turn up the amount of electricity that goes through the muscles through that outside source to whatever desired level you want, to however high basically that individual can tolerate, basically until something would rip off the bone. Obviously, hopefully you wouldn't go that far, but that maximum level of contraction is your level of absolute strength. And then practically how you would measure it would be a sudden stretch, measuring the amount of force that your muscles can produce under a sudden stretch, okay? After I explain what this is, I'm going to show you a couple practical examples that will make a little bit more sense, okay? So, basically, absolute strength is the amount of force that you can produce under involuntary contraction or under a sudden reflexive stretch, okay? Your maximum strength is then how hard your muscles can contract under voluntary contraction, okay? So, just holding position and then contracting your muscles as hard as you can, however much force that you can produce through voluntary contraction is your level of maximum strength, okay? Then, since your absolute strength is always going to be higher than your maximum strength, the reason for this is because your body has natural governing organs that kind of downregulate the amount of force that you can output, because your body doesn't want something to rip off the bone, okay? So those organs and those sensory organs are there to actually protect you from injuring yourself. And then through training, you can actually kind of down-regulate them so that your body learns how to produce more force, okay? So absolute strength is that involuntary contraction. It's always going to be higher. And then your maximum strength is how hard you can contract under voluntary contraction. And then the difference between these two would be your strength deficit, okay? So now I'm going to go over some practical ways how you can actually measure this, especially in a gym setting, because you can kind of measure this in a lab where you would hook yourself up to that e-stim machine that I talked about before. Just try to turn that machine up as high as you could until the individual couldn't tolerate the amount of pain that was being produced. No, kind of sounds crazy, but that's kind of how you could measure absolute strength, your real pure absolute strength, in a lab setting, and then you can compare it to your maximum strength by hooking them up to a machine that could measure their force output. You can compare the two, and that could give you the number, okay? Now, this is another way that you can actually do that. Remember that your absolute strength can also be measured by the amount of force that your muscles can produce after like a sudden stretch, okay? So one of the best examples of things that we can do is a vertical jump, okay? What we're gonna do is we're gonna do a normal counter movement jump, okay? We're gonna take that number and then we're gonna compare it to a static jump where you hold the bottom position for 3 or 4 seconds. We're gonna do 3 seconds here, okay? What that does is that kind of takes that stretch reflex, that stretch response out of it, and makes it more of a max strength movement. It's just how hard your muscles can contract under voluntary force when you want to contract your muscles, okay? What you're then going to do is you're going to take the difference in between these two. Now, this is a pretty good way to measure kind of an overall, kind of get an overall profile on an athlete, because power is movement and joint angle specific. So just because you have a strength deficit that's going to tell you something specific for the vertical jump doesn't necessarily mean that it's the same for your bench press or same for a deadlift, since those are kind of different movement patterns. But this overall jump, this vertical jump, does give you a pretty good indication because of the amount of muscles and everything that it does involve. So again, this is just one way to measure that. I'm going to show you another way to measure it afterwards for a movement specific. But again, this is just a good way to get an overall idea, okay? Now I'm going to do jump. Haven't warmed up or anything. I'm sure this will go great. I'm sure nothing could go wrong. But what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to use our jump mat. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to step on it once. Okay. Or select jump once. Okay. It's been a while since I did a normal vertical jump too. So let's see. Oof. That was rough. It was 27. I landed off the mat. Let's see if I can get it in. Okay. Okay. 27 and a half. Rough. Oof. It's okay. We'll get back there. Okay. So that is my measurement for my counter movement jump. Okay. Then, after a couple seconds of shaking it out, I'm clearly just stalling here, so I can rest. Oof. Took a lot out of me. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold that static position jump and then try to jump up as high as I can without rebending my knees, okay? So, we'll go down, okay? I'm going to go down to the bottom. 1, 2, 3. And that was 24.2, okay? So, practically, what does that mean, okay? So, actually taking this from Joe DeFranco, something that I've learned from him is that you want your static jump to be between 80 and 85% of your counter movement jump, okay? So, I'm actually pretty sure I nailed that. It was actually higher, which is good for my athletic goals right now, which I'll tell you in a second. So, that counter movement jump is kind of your baseline, that measurement of your absolute strength, because it's that amount of force that you can produce under a quick stretch, okay? The maximum strength was the static jump because that stretch reflex was reduced, and it's more just how hard can your muscles contract to produce force, okay? If an individual's static jump is not between that 80-85% range of their vertical jump, then what you can tell from this is that they have a poor ability to produce force under slow movements or poor maximum strength, and that you can actually get them a lot more powerful by getting them stronger. So by building muscle, performing strength training, like normal heavy deadlifts, heavy squats, things like that are actually going to get you stronger, okay? That'll increase their power output because that's where their weakness lies. Now, if that's actually too high, okay, higher than that 80-85% range, that also gives you an indication of the type of athlete. They're more that strength, they're more strength and slow strength driven. So if you're dealing with an athlete who's trying to get more powerful, more explosive, say increase their vertical jump, what you would want to do is work on plyometrics and speed movements or speed strength movements, because that is where their weaknesses lie, okay? That's what's going to what you're going to work on there is your nervous system's ability to fire quickly and produce force quickly with those stretch reflexes, okay? Kind of work more on that absolute strength style, which will then work more on that speed, which will then increase their overall power. Okay, so what I was talking about before, right, that I just showed you that example of comparing the normal vertical jump, that counter movement jump, to a static jump, holding that static position and then jumping up, right? Counter jump being the measurement of absolute strength, the static jump being the measurement of maximal strength, okay? And again, that's a great overall or way to determine the athlete's strengths and weaknesses overall, but like I mentioned, power is plane and movement specific, so how would you then test it for other movements, okay? Well, when I was looking this up, I actually kind of found a method that Charles Poliquin used to use, okay? And it was called the 4+2 method, okay? Now, basically what you would do is you would work up to a 4-rep max within a specific movement, okay? Using the tempo of 4 seconds on the way down, no pause at the bottom, as fast as you can on the way up, and then no pause at the top, okay? So just to give an example, if I would do that for the bench press, 1, 2, 3, 4, tap up, 1, 2, 3, 4, tap up, 1, 2, 4-second has to actually be a 4-second. You can't go 1, 2, 3, 4, because the tempo is there to reduce the amount of stretch reflex and stretch response that you can actually use for a specific movement. Okay, so that tempo makes it more of a maximum strength measurement because it relies more on your muscle contraction force, and again, the ability of your muscle to produce force by contracting under voluntary control and then pressing up. So what you would do first is you would work up to a 4-rep max while you can still keep that tempo, okay? Then what you would do next is so that's for the 2, or the +2 part, is that you would then load the bar up more, okay, than what you did for your 4-rep max, and you would go until you would continue to do sets of 2 reps, 8-second eccentrics on the way down, with then partners helping you up. Okay, so it does take a little bit more work, does take some more people, but can still be done. Okay, partners helping you up on the concentric part. Okay, we can always do or produce more force during the eccentric portion of a lift, or that lowering portion, or that lengthening muscle portion of a lift. So that is more of a measurement of your absolute strength than the 4-rep max. Okay, so what you would then do is you would compare the weights of the 2 reps that you did as your absolute strength measurement, and the 4-rep max that you worked up to as your maximum strength, measurement. Okay, then you would compare the 2. Okay, again, Charles says in his article about this that he would want athletes be between 1 and 40% of difference. Bodybuilders okay between 25 and 40%. Okay, and then if people were under that kind of 25% range, that your muscle's ability to produce force is kind of almost tapped out for that specific movement. Okay, or your muscle's ability to contract is almost tapped out for that specific movement pattern. So what you would then need to do was you would then need to focus more on hypertrophy, of building up the muscle bigger, so that it has a bigger base to be able to contract harder with, and then you would need to teach it how to actually contract harder through strength training. Okay, this is a little confusing because hypertrophy doesn't necessarily mean being stronger, but hypertrophy, or having bigger muscles, gives you the potential to be able to be stronger. Okay, so hypertrophy just kind of provides a base for strength, and then you actually need to train those neurological components of strength, that skill, that muscle coordination, through actual strength training and practicing the movement. So that hypertrophy would happen first, and then that strength training would happen afterwards if you were under that 25% range, or towards that lower end, because again, that means your muscle's ability to produce force is almost tapped out for that specific size. Now, as I mentioned before, you can also measure a strength deficit for a specific muscle group, and the only way that I currently know how to do this would be in a laboratory setting, because you would need to hook up an e-stim machine to that specific muscle group in order to get an absolute strength reading on that specific muscle group. I don't know of any ways where you could necessarily get a stretch reflex or get an involuntary contraction on a specific muscle group using specific movements. So keep looking that up. If anybody else knows, feel free to tell me. I would love to learn. But so you would hook up that e-stim machine to the specific muscle groups, contract as hard as you could until the individual couldn't tolerate the amount of force anymore, take that as the score, and then you would compare them on their max strength of that specific muscle group by, again, using a 4-plate force out plate reading, something that could measure their force output for a specific muscle group, and then you would compare the two. Okay. Now, what this tells you is something a little bit different about an individual's athletic ability than comparing a movement, or comparing the two measurements does for a specific movement. Okay, If the individual has a large strength deficit, that means their absolute strength is a lot higher than their maximum strength. That means their neurological system is actually what the limiting factor in their amount of strength or in their amount of force that they can produce. So what you need to do is focus more on that kind of plyometric and speed strength abilities of that muscle, and kind of train that, basically kind of train that mind-muscle connection of that specific muscle to be able to contract hard and quickly, okay? Opposite, if there's a small strength deficit, that means the maximum strength is very close to the absolute strength, then that means that, kind of similar to what Charles was saying, is that muscle's ability to produce force is very close to tapped out for that specific size, okay? So what you would then need to do would be to grow the muscle, perform hypertrophy movements, hypertrophy rep ranges, eat in calorie surplus, and then you would need to perform strength movements in order to then train that new size's ability to produce force. Okay, so that is kind of what you would do for an individual muscle. So to just kind of wrap this up and kind of go over this conclusion, to kind of takeaway points is that absolute strength, or the strength deficit, is the difference between the individual's absolute strength and maximum strength. Okay, the absolute strength is how hard the individual can contract a certain muscle under involuntary contraction, or that involuntary contraction being that sudden reflexive action. The reason why that works is because a reflex is not technically under voluntary control. It's something that just kind of happens through more control of the nervous system as opposed to conscious control over the brain. So anything that is reflexive action works for absolute strength. Okay, so that involuntary force production versus that maximum strength production, which is the amount of force an individual can produce under voluntary control. Okay, you can kind of get an overall reading, an overall profile on an athlete by comparing their counter movement jump to their static jump. If they have a large strength deficit, that means their absolute strength is a lot higher than their max strength, then you need to get them stronger and train them more on that slow speed voluntary contraction abilities to get them overall more powerful. And then if they have a small deficit, it's the opposite. That means you need to train more of that speed component and through plyometrics and then speed strength movements in order to get them more powerful. If you are comparing and contrasting a specific movement with the 4+2 method, remember you go 4 seconds on the way down, press up normal to a 4 rep max, and then have partners help you for the 2 8-second eccentric reps. Then compare and contrast the two. Again, you want to be between generally 25 and 40%. If you are lower than that 25%, that tells us that, again, your ability to produce force is close to tapped out for that specific muscle size. So you need to get bigger, and then you need to get stronger. For an individual muscle, if there is a large strength deficit, again, that max strength is a lot lower than that absolute strength. That means the neurological system is what's holding that specific muscle back. We then need to train that neurological system through speed strength movements, or like plyometric actions, or other speed strength quick movements, teaching that muscle how to produce force quickly. Kind of like what Charles said for the movement on the 4+2 method, if they have a small strength deficit for a specific muscle group, then that means what you need to do is, again, you're close to tapped out to your force production capability for that muscle size, so you then need to get a bigger muscle and then get a stronger muscle. So, hope this helped. I learned a lot about the strength deficit through the Super Training book. It's been really interesting trying to learn and read about this, so I hope this was fun for you.